Hello and welcome everyone to our Navigating Conflict with Grace webinar. I am so excited to be hosting this. It is a topic very, very close to my heart, and we have an extraordinary panel of speakers and panelists today. Now, this topic of navigating conflict with grace is so relevant to all of us because we all have issues and challenges with dealing with our frustrations and the frustrations of other people. And I think it's hugely emotive for everyone. And the great news is that when you have tools that are in your pocket, so to speak, they really can guide you to have a framework of support so that you don't need to go into the heated emotions. So today we have some amazing speakers. I'm going to introduce them all, and then we will get on with giving you some incredible tips. So we have here today, I will start with Karleen. So we have Karleen Savage, who is a trailblazer in conflict resolution. She began her career in mediating and as a mediator, and she loved it so much that she deepened her knowledge into crisis and then training as a hostage negotiator. Now, she found that her emotional intelligence, her personal background, and her unique range of skills made her have something quite special in this space. And so she created the groundbreaking Savage theory of resolution. And that is a 5-skill model for resolving conflicts. So we're going to be hearing some of those today, which I'm very excited about. She also has delivered a widely watched TED Talk. And Karleen, I'm just very, very delighted to have you on board today. So welcome. We also have Leslie Nydick. So Leslie is a conflict resolution and communication expert who helps individuals and organizations turn conflict into opportunity. Leslie started her career rather interestingly in facilities planning and management, but found that actually conflict was everywhere in the environments she was in. And more interestingly, she loved the process of navigating it. And so with that, found that her passion and her deep skill was around this area of managing conflict and frustration in the workplace. And so she became a mediator. And now she's a recognized expert in conflict resolution, negotiation, and communication. She is the host of the Let's Talk About It podcast. She also authors a blog, and she's been a member of the adjunct faculty at New York University for more than 15 years. So she shares today practical insights that are going to drive change, and we are delighted to have you on the panel as well, Leslie. Welcome. Finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Lindy Greer. So Dr. Lindy Greer has a PhD in social and organizations psychology. She's a leading expert in high-performing teams and leadership. And she spent 6 years at Stanford diving into conflict and teams, and is now a faculty director for leadership development at Michigan Ross University. Lindy's research is published in top journals. She advises global giants like Amazon and Google and the NFL, and has also received numerous awards, both for her teaching and her real-world impact. That includes one I particularly like, the top 30 management thinkers to watch. She also has numerous tools for how to be better and function better in teams. And a lot of those are supported as well through academic research, which makes it sort of particularly interesting. So very excited to hear some of those tools today as well. So thank you all so much for coming. We've got an amazing panel, and I think everybody's going to really benefit from your tools and insights. So we're going to kick it off with our first question, which is to Karleen. So Karleen, as a trained hostage negotiator, you have been coached to handle the most intense situations I know. And what I want to start with is, what are the things that you feel really trip people up? Like, where do people get in their own way? Like, and what shouldn't we do when it comes to conflict? Over to you.
What a great question, Emma. Yeah, so in the background of hostage negotiations, I mean, you look at the news and they'll tell you what everybody's done wrong in the hostage fields. But one of them is assumptions and the lack of curiosity. And so a lot of times when people make statements, we are assuming the reality. So if I said, how is everyone? And they say, fine. It's my version of fine, not their version of fine. And their version of fine can be very different, extremely different from yours. And so that's the assumption we make. Lack of curiosity means we're not going to ask the question of, so what does that mean if everyone's fine? And that lack of curiosity, because we made the assumption, can get us into some hot water.
Wow, that's a really interesting one. So actually it's this idea that we all have different perspectives on an issue, but if we don't ask, we'll never know.
Yeah, don't make the assumption. Find out if what you're thinking is actually true.
Yeah, brilliant. That's super useful. Before we move on, would you say there are any other major flags, or that's kind of the big one, this assumption?
Major flags, I mean, that's a pinnacle for us, but it's also, it's easier said than done, which is usually people are deeply emotional. And when you care about an outcome, when the stakes are high, and it doesn't matter what the setting is, when that is the situation and you bring the emotion into it, you can make everything go sideways. So it's really important that you stay out. Someone made a comment to me once, and it was more in a private setting, but the comment was, you just don't care enough. I care more than you do. And so as we were processing that through, what we realized is when you care significantly, you will keep your stuff out of it. You will keep the baggage, do all you can. It's not never going to be a flawless situation, but you will keep a lot of your baggage out of that situation so that you can think clearer, that you can get information that's relevant to the situation, that you can dial into what's important to that other person to make sure that all things are sought after or equalized in that setting. Does that help?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think it's so interesting because actually you're right. Like whenever there's an issue like this, we do have emotions, but clarity on that idea that actually it's our emotions that can totally throw us sideways and therefore move away from that clarity of thought, that precision, that ability to get curious is so useful. Amazing. Thank you. So Leslie, I'll come to you next. So the same question, in your work, where do you feel people trip themselves up? Where do they go wrong? What shouldn't we do in terms of conflict?
Well, first of all, everything that Karleen said and more. Here's a couple that stand out for me. The first one being believing we can swipe away conflict. When it's ignored, it doesn't go away. It just gets worse. So, and as per a recent survey by Bravely, 70% of employees believe that avoiding all these difficult conversations make them go away. And they're doing it, 70% of the people. So anyone who has been swiping away conflict, they are not alone. So it's all about changing our mindset, being the one who believes there's an opportunity, even if you don't know what it is. Because if you approach those difficult conversations, you will stand out as a leader in your organization, whether you have the title or not, because there are so few that are approaching it. And the second one is really part of it, of why people avoid it. The focus on blame is an absolute misstep, because attributing fault rather than the focus on the solutions and the lessons learned, just that's what's preventing people from talking about it.
That is, yeah, so brilliant. And I just want to recap that. So the first is this idea that actually, if we just push it under the rug, then it will just be dealt with on its own accord. And I think you're so right. It's very English, I think, to be like, yeah, okay, I didn't notice that, push down the frustration, but actually, it doesn't work, right? And I think before we get to the blame one, which is also interesting, will you just deepen that? So what happens when people repress or ignore or pretend it doesn't exist? What are the consequences?
It just festers and builds. I recently worked with two people who had done that for two different reasons. One was really bothered by something that happened a year ago. The other one, and the other person was not aware of that. The other person was more bothered by something that happened 6 months ago. And here we were a year from the first incident, and there was an explosion during a meeting. I mean, and I'm calling it explosion. It impacted a lot of other people. And it was when we started talking about it that both of them realized it still hurt a lot what happened. It never got addressed. It just was like, well, if I don't talk about it, it'll go away and it won't happen again. And meanwhile, something completely different happened. So, and the same thing happens when people, quit a job because of it. A lot of times that doesn't make it go away either, just because you're not seeing that person. That issue becomes your hot button that affects future relationships, even though it had nothing to do with the past relationship.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? So actually, if we push it down, not only could it turn into a bigger deal or explode in a situation when you don't need it to explode, but actually it could turn into kind of emotional baggage or triggers that come up in different relationships. Like, you can't get away from, I guess what I'm getting from that is, you can't get away from it unless you deal with it, because this is the human psyche. And so these things have to be dealt with, or they're going to fester in some way, which is so useful, such a helpful thought, I think. And then the second one you said is this focusing on blame. And my mom used to call it the blame game, like he's playing the blame game. And so that's a really interesting idea, I think, like, because it's very easy, and it's one that we have in our methodology as well. It's very easy to be like, well, clearly I'm right here and you're wrong. Like, there's got to be a right and a wrong, and you're wrong. So yeah, will you, like, what happens then when people do that? What are the consequences, in your experience?
They never talk about the real topic. It's all about this right and wrong, or that manager that walks around going, I want to know who did that. And the fear just builds in everyone. And that's what they're dealing with, the fear, not the mistake or the misstep that occurred, that we can all talk about, like, hey, how can we prepare differently next time? Like, what should we be doing differently? Or what should we do the same? They never get to the real conversation. They're just walking around fearful of, am I going to be blamed for something? And am I going to get punished?
Yeah, which is just like, avoiding actually what you need to be doing. Super helpful. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
Lindy, finally with you. So the same question here. Where do you find people go wrong, trip themselves up? What shouldn't we do?
Well, of course, +1 to all the amazing insights that were just shared, from getting more curious to trying not to avoid the hard things. We know it's going to get worse. So the 3 that I would give you from my side are how we need to be better at practicing the muscle for conflict. We need to be better at planning for conflict, and we need to be better at polishing our skills within conflict. In terms of practicing, conflict can be very mundane. The definition of conflict in research that we use is simply the expression of difference, right? Of even just your friends talking about different restaurants for dinner. That is a conflict. We may not always code it as such. We may save it for those big, hairy, emotional blow-up moments. But the more that we are actively trying to lean into the conversations where people do have different views, even if it's, for example, with me negotiating with my stepson over who takes the trash out, these are conflict moments. The more practice we get, the better our muscle. The next mistake I see, rather than not practicing it, is not planning for it. And so I do a lot of work, especially with executive teams. And if, to Leslie's point, we avoid that conflict for too long, eventually it's going to spill over in a time we don't want it, such as budget planning for the year. At Graduate Holding, its business unit North America for the last 6 months, this is the time it's going to spill over. And so the ability for ourselves and for our teams to have, if you will, a safety release valve is really important. The very best teams that I work with are able to give and receive feedback in a formalized manner with one another. They're able to talk about themselves as a team. If people are going one-on-one for more difficult conversations, they're not blindsiding people. They're emailing in advance to say, hey, would it be okay for us to have a talk about topic X? And then as they're planning for it, they actually are, if you will, having a game plan for how to get through that conversation, whether it's a difficult one-on-one or a difficult team meeting. If you look at the research on negotiation, one of the single biggest predictors of success in a negotiation where both people ostensibly can win is how much homework you put in advance. Have you done that homework building on Karleen's ideas to actually try to perspective take in advance? How good is the data you have that you're bringing the other side might have? What is the structure of the conversation? Where are you having it? That level of planning and intentionality can make or break the difference in reaching the outcome that you want. The final one I'll give is you could practice and plan for conflicts all day, every day, and never get any better at it. We need to find ways to keep polishing our skill set. I'm a huge fan of behavioral experimentation. And how do we intentionally gain self-awareness of our skills and abilities and have plans for every quarter, for example, of a different skill set to be trying to practice? Within polishing different sub-skills that we know are very important from the data, it could be how we should, the words we use, for example, in a conflict situation. Do we present things as fundamental truths or as ideas? Can we disentangle ourself, our ego, our persona from the data? Because at the end of the day, a conflict is generally about a piece of data. I have something that says this, you have something that says that. Let's work through it. But truly in a epic me versus you, usually is never actually the truth. It's usually different buckets of data. And so how do we use language that gets people to the data versus the bigger holistic me versus you? And the other one in terms of polishing is how we deal with emotions. The minute that we get emotional in a conflict, emotions are highly contagious, we know from research. And we know from say Kahneman that once we hit animal brain where we have emotions in our brain, it's very hard to reach a logical outcome, logical agreement to the conflict. And so your ability to manage emotions in the moment is something we can and should all be practicing, especially as for so many of us, our muscle for conflict and emotion has gone down since the pandemic and remote work. Skills I love and working on my own emotion regulation and conflicts, breathing. Surgeons learn box breathing as a tactic for difficult surgeries. In for, hold for, out for, hold for. Works very well in your average executive meeting too, and allows your brain to keep getting oxygen to keep the emotions out. The other mistake that we often make, in addition to mismanaging our own, is how we engage with others. In some of our research, we found that the vast majority of people, when they see an emotion on another person at work, have a fight or flight reaction. The fight reaction being, okay, that's a problem to solve. You have an emotion, let's make it go away. Versus the flight, similar to conflict. If that's not happening, my boss is not angry right now, I can't cope, I'm just not going to see it. In our research, we find that acknowledgement of just being able to name that, hey, it's getting a little tense in here, is one of the most important things you can do to de-escalate a conflict situation. You're not trying to fix it, but you're also not ignoring it, but simply acknowledging what's there. So practicing, find the situations where conflict is every day, build the muscle, plan for it, make sure you're not blindsiding people, but you have a meeting and you're thinking through your game plan in advance, and polish it. Keep thinking about new ways to get better at it.
Wow. There was so much in that. I feel like we could sort of stretch that out, sort of a 2-hour seminar and still not get there. But that was really, really useful. And I think in terms of what I'm getting of what people don't do and where we trip ourselves up is that actually we're not being mindful either before or during. So, there's no sense of, okay, this is a thing, this is a skill that I can learn, that I can do my homework for. I think you made a really good point about negotiation, actually, that the difference is in the preparation. So that's super, super interesting in terms of like, well, where can we learn at the very big change, or, because you've all said so many amazing changes, but actually here's one that we can do before the moment, where we go, actually, I'm going to prepare. Like I agree, like with our method as well, it's the same. So that's really, really useful. And then, yeah, obviously you've got the practicing, and then this planning, which is the prepare, and then this polish. I love that, as this idea of, you know, being having an active involvement in your own ability to deal with difficulty. And difficulty is part of life. Conflict, as we all know, which is why so many people have signed up to this, is part of life. To think about it only in the heat of the moment, and then all those emotions that come about as a result of us not being happy with how we've responded can just take you off somewhere else. But actually, instead, to see it as a skill and, like you say, to continually upskill and be working on it, I think that's really, really useful. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So this now brings us to the next part, and sort of the bigger question, which I think is the question everybody's waiting for, which is, right, now let's get to actual concrete tools, okay? So Karleen, I'm going to start with you. Let's hear some tools based around your training, from mediation through to crisis, through to hostage negotiation. What are maybe 2 or 3 really powerful tools that you can give our listeners that can help them navigate conflict with grace?
Regardless of the field, and man, you guys, this is so good. And it's interesting. Okay, so in the fields that I work in, it's really interesting as I look at even at our panel and how different we all are, but how our objectives are kind of all guiding in the same direction. It's really beautiful to watch. I can spend, a few minutes with somebody and understand, because that's my job. I can spend a few minutes with people and understand their triggers really fast, because that is the job, right? If I'm working with different kinds of environments, maybe not hostage or crisis or in a courtroom, yeah, you can go a couple different directions. So I've been reading some of the questions, so good. And so that's just the overarching view. Now, what I just did was I addressed one person's question about how do you enter that room without saying I'm entering the room. And you do it much like I just did. And that is, instead of saying, look, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with you, you might say something like, look, I want to have a discussion, but before I do, what I want you to understand out of this is, if you remember nothing, remember that your quality of work is really good. That's an important factor for you to understand as we go into this conversation. So it might get a little wonky or maybe uncomfortable, but I just want you to know your work is critical here. Your presence is important. Some one-liner, as a hostage crisis and mediator, we do one-liners because people, they can't think in big, long sentences. And so one of the skill sets that we use is curiosity. But when I say curiosity, what I mean is an exceptional learner. How good are you about learning a skill set? How good are you about walking in a room? If I said, I'm going to show you how to change a tire, and I was really good at it, are you going to come in and tell me how it is? Tell me what I need to do? Tell me what I need to have? Is your attitude, are you going to put up a barrier? Oh, you're really not that good. What are those things that you're walking in with? Another thing is that, and I don't know if I'm answering this question, Emma, so you can circle back on me. And so another thing is that how well you learn is how well those outcomes will happen. So are you an exceptional learner? Yeah, another skill set is your attitude. How you walk into the room, how you hold in a room, how you manage your room has a lot to do with your attitude. When you, for example, when everybody saw the panel, you made assumptions. She's really stark, or she's really strong, or, oh my gosh, she's a hostage negotiator. I got to hear. And you came in with all of these assumptions. Now imagine that in a tense situation, and all of a sudden you're coming in with all these assumptions. One of the things that you want to do is your attitude in a conflict should be, I'm here to help, but I'm not going to solve it. In a hostage crisis and courtroom, we are there to help. We facilitate an outcome, but we are not going to solve it. If somebody wants to take action in a situation, we cannot stop that action. We can take proactive action. We can preface a situation. In a hostage situation, you will preface, look, John, look, I got to tell you, you know that it's not going to come out that way. I can't allow that to happen. However, tell me what I can do. Tell me what your situation is so that I can facilitate and work with that. And so
sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking this is so interesting because you've said about, so first, like always coming in with a kind comment, which I think is such an easy tip and so easy to forget if you're like, I've got this looming difficult conversation I need to have. And then secondly, attitude. So like if I'm the person who's angry, like how would I use that idea of attitude, or what tool can you give me that I can know to come out to sort of a peaceful outcome on the other side?
Sure. And somebody asked about high emotions, highly emotion. Think about it. Crisis and hostage and courtrooms are very high emotion. And so, Emma, I forgot your question. Try it again.
Yeah, of course. So it's how can you said about attitude. So if you were going to give me that as a tool, or if there's another tool, what tool would you give me if I'm angry? So I'm in the emotion of anger. What tool would you recommend for me to, deal with that with the other person?
Sure. Being honest about the room, being honest about the situation. If you are highly charged, Emma, then somebody like me would say something like, you seem really lit up. And I wouldn't do it like that. I'd say, Emma, you seem really upset. You seem really lit up. Depending upon the relationship you have with the person and the climate and the environment and what's happening, how you manage your room is going to manage the outcome. Emma, you seem really, really upset about it. Tell me about it. Now, that seems cliche, but if you're casual in your conversation, remember, conflict is not about supercharge. Conflict is about conversation. That's all it is. So if you manage your conversation, I'm going to say, Emma, you seem really mad at me. What did I do? Is it something that I did? And I do that a lot in everyday settings. You seem really upset, or you seem hurt, or you seem angry. Did I cause that? Or are you stressed about the situation? And being honest is your best alternative. But how you coin that, how you curve that is going to be the power that you have. So it really does. When Lindy said practice the muscle, it really does. And you can practice it over choosing a place like a restaurant and you don't really want to go there. You can do it with a high stakes conversation of what got you here? What happened? Where can we go from here? And if you even listen to my nuances that I'm saying, I'm tripping over my words. Like when I do those kinds of things, some of those are very deliberate because I'm wanting to de-escalate the situation. So I'm not going to go, you're going to do it, then we're going to go, and I'm going to just dun those situations. I'm going to have a very honest conversation.
That's
Emma, you just seem really upset. And I'm not sure what I can do about it, but tell me how I can help.
Brilliant. So I think we've got a really powerful tip of being honest and naming it, which is super, super helpful. Brilliant. Thank you, Karleen. So Lindy, over to you. Would be great to hear a couple of powerful tools for how we navigate conflict with grace.
Sure. I'll bucket them within my 3 buckets if it's helpful. So for practicing, when this is more informal on the fly, I love to make sure that I'm trying to elicit enough diversity of thought around me. Diversity of thought is what we would call task conflict, right? That day to day, you're sitting with your team who has different ideas. For example, at the end of many meetings, a leader would say, okay, so we all agree, which kills conflict, right? Are there ways to reframe it, such as who disagrees? A little bit higher bar, but if your team is there, more power to you. Or maybe who has any questions on this idea? What is one thing we could do to make this idea better? But to really try to lower the bar in your conversation for others to offer different ideas as much as you can. Then if you do have those times where it's getting a little bit more loaded, certainly for me working in C-suites, there is a lot of anger, a lot of emotion, a lot of stress and tension. And so that ability to be self-aware and to own your own emotions, to regulate it. I saw a question in the chat for more tools for that. Breathing is one. There's also great research from my colleague, Ethan Cross, KROSS. He has a couple books that just came out on this that is awesome. One of the ones he looks at is asking yourself what a third person would do, such as, okay, I'm in a meeting, I'm getting flooded. I can't believe Evan's saying that again. Okay, in my head, what would my mentor Maxim tell me to do? Or he even finds if you talk about yourself in the third person, which is kind of funky and weird sounding to yourself, but it also helps to distance you from the emotion of what should Lindy do on her best day here? Probably not snap, even though I really want to. And so try to elicit conflict, try to stay calm in conflict through different tools of emotion regulation. Ethan's stuff is a great place if you want more. Then in terms of planning, really tactical tips I love to think about is I love meeting agendas. If you think about the science of behavior change, right, it's easier to remember a new habit, in this case, building our conflict muscle, if you attach the habit to something you already do. So for example, if you remember to floss your teeth, a new habit, you leave it next to your toothbrush, and then hopefully you brush your teeth already, you're gonna be more likely to floss. Well, for most teams, the toothbrush, the thing that hopefully you already do, I hope, meeting agendas. And so how might you use meeting agendas as a toothbrush to attach something on? Such as saying, okay, we don't just have an item to say strategy, but we actually have a more active verb in our meeting agenda that lets people know the expectation that we're going to have conflict and that it's a good and legitimate thing. Depending on culture and your team's conflict level, you could have something like brainstorm strategy, lowest entry bar to have conflict. At least you're getting different ideas out there. Maybe you bring in some Post-its. Higher level might be debate strategy if your team is able to do that. And then on your agenda, you could tack in some more structured techniques to have a debate within your team, such as a rotating devil's advocate. The job of devil's advocate is not naysaying. That's not helpful. It's asking powerful questions, as both Leslie and Karleen have alluded to. You also could have something like red team, blue team, where you split the team in two to have the debate about should we do the strategy, yes or no. Then if we get into the polishing, then a couple tools and ideas there. One of my favorite frameworks for how to communicate in conflict situations to keep getting better is Lara of listen, ask, respond, and add. Otherwise said more simply by Stephen Covey as seek to understand before you seek to be understood. But to hold myself accountable anytime I'm in one of these conflict situations that I have worked hard to create, because remember, that's where the value of a team is, right? There's no reason to have a team unless you're having this debate. So if I'm polishing my skill to use that conflict wisely, Lara and or seek to understand before you seek to be understood reminds you that you have two goals in those situations. One is to ask follow-up questions to make sure you understand the real underlying issue. Okay, you say that you need $5 billion for this investment, Google. Okay, well, why? What's the underlying reason? There's research from Allison Wynn Brooks at Harvard that shows the most powerful thing to do to get a second date, happy spouse, and also a higher performing team, follow-up questions. Your spouse says, you ask your spouse, how are you? They say good. And then you jump in with how your day was. We do that all the time in our team meetings too, versus saying, oh, you said your day was good. Why was it good? Could you tell me a little bit more about it? And so as you're working on that curiosity, as Karleen was talking about, I love that accountability to myself of follow-up questions before I ever even begin to share what's on my mind, to listen and ask first. And then the second half of Lara, listen, ask, second half is respond and add. And this is very simple yes and from improv, right? So, okay, I have really listened. I think I understand what you might be trying to say to me. Well, I could then just jump in, well, okay, for my side is this. Well, you've crossed wires. And the respond and add forces you, and the way I phrase it is to find at least 10% of what they said you could say yes to. And that then you're trying to build and to link what you're trying to add the data to the data they already put on the table. Of, okay, I hear you say that we need to make this investment for Google in order for us to stay viable against the competition. Okay, I agree. It is really important for us to stay viable against the competition. I wonder if this other possibility might also be something we could consider. And so you went from yes, no on the investment to asking a question to understand why they want to do it. and then trying to find a way to yes and. Remember, you're not categorically giving up your point of view, but you're trying to use their language back at them and building on at least a little bit of what they said. So you're turning the situation from one of destructing into constructing. So hopefully a few of those tools help. Big ones always are planning for conflict. The more we legitimize it in teams, through having it on the agenda, using some more formal tools, and then we work on our wording as we practice and as we polish, the better we'll do.
Wow, there's so much there, and I was writing as fast as I could to try and grab this, but I think there's some really, really powerful things. I think firstly, there's this overarching concept, which I think is kind of almost a slight paradigm shift, which is conflict is good. Like conflict is really healthy for relationships. And actually, if we do what you were saying, Leslie, which is like put it under the rug, not only will it fester, but actually we're avoiding all the potential growth that we can get from engaging with this conflict. So I think that first idea is so powerful. And then this idea of building this habit of healthy conflict, which where you said, using the what's his name again? I've read it twice, that book, but the habit guy.
Oh, for me, I tend to follow Katie Milkman's research. She's a
Okay.
professor at Wharton and has the best evidence base in habits. Oh, and for the mantra of Seek to Understand, that was Stephen Covey. Go for it.
That I love. But yeah, this idea of like putting our floss next to our toothbrush. Let's put our agenda for building the conflict muscle into our meetings. And this, the red team, blue team, the rotating devil's advocate, that's just brilliant. I think that's super, super useful. Then yes, with polishing Laura, listen, ask, respond, add. I think what you said that's so powerful for me there is seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And I think that again is like another of those paradigm shifts, like, because often we think, well, I need to defend myself, or I need to get my point ahead, and actually that's such a sort of egoic need, and it's not a real need, because actually the more you go into the space of the other person, the more you're creating a fertile mutual receptivity, right? Of their going, I feel heard, I'm ready for you now. And then you can actually both have that mutual respect. So that's so lovely. And I also, just to finish there with the yes and, it's like 10%, find that 10% that you can say yes to. Again, we have a tool that's similar, but I love that 10% thing, because actually there's always going to be 10%, just from a humanity space. So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Very powerful. Leslie, finally over to you. So a couple of tools that you can recommend that will help people navigate conflict.
Sure. Some of my favorites. I mean, the first one, and I'm going to say why. Pause before responding. Now, how do I do that? I started to do it a little. You count. You have a number that you're going to count to before you respond, whether it's 5, whether it's 3, whether it's 8. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And by the way, to add to what both were saying about practicing, do this during everyday conversations. Practice that pause so that you get more comfortable with that silence. Because when we fill it too much, it doesn't leave room for others to speak up. And that short pause is never a moment of nothing. It either becomes a moment for you to reset and remember that what they're talking about is their issue, not yours. Or it also prompts people to start editing what they had already said, sharing more. So the pause is key, because that silence is the uncomfortable thing that people go to fill it with. So people will start sharing. The other one, and it's just emphasizing what's already said, the whole idea of curiosity is important. And I emphasize that we've got to start with open questions, the ones like yes and, how, what, and I'm emphasizing how and what. If we're in a tense situation, avoid the why. The why in our lives, in our purpose, is like great to talk about. But if we're in tense situations, that why puts people on the defensive. It could be used later, because we do want to know the why, but try to replace it with a how or a what at the beginning. because if it gets into the defensive, it becomes that attack and defend thing, and we haven't really talked about the topic. And one of the most important things is listen more. And it's that whole idea of stop listening to respond. And there's several studies that have talked about how we can talk at 125 to 200 words per minute. And there's other studies that have a larger range. But the key is we can listen at much greater amounts. Sometimes some studies have shown 400 to 700 words per minute. So let that sink in. There's this big difference in capacity. And what happens is we fill that capacity. We start planning what our responses are, what our next questions are, what we are going to have for dinner, what we did this morning. And when we do that, we stop listening. So we have to just listen, and don't worry, we're going to have time to plan our response after they're done talking. And one last point, because it definitely touches on something that Karleen and Lindy mentioned. I like to say, step up to the balcony. You may be in the conflict if you're part of it, and step up to the balcony. Think about what this looks like. Think about what it is from a further away view. And that helps shift from the totally subjective to trying to be a little more objective. And it helps to see it from those other angles. So it's just a thing I like to say.
I love those. That's really, really powerful. And just to recap, so the first one, we've got the pause, which I think is brilliant. This idea of actually what you can get in the pause is both for yourself to just reset and take the emotion out of it. And actually, neuroscientifically, it's that thing of moving from your kind of prefrontal cortex to like fight, flight to that more cerebral place of conscious thinking. So that's brilliant. Next one is curiosity. I love that. The focus on avoid the why. Let's go for what, let's go for how, which is brilliant. And then this deep listening that we can get, but we have to choose it, because otherwise our little monkey mind is going to get distracted. So it's actually you get curious and then you deeply listen. Very, very brilliant. And then the step up to the balcony is so good. I love that. It's such a great phrase of like, yes, we can get beyond, we can rise above, we can get that airplane view. So really powerful ideas. Thank you. I will just give one quick one of my favorites from the Serlin method, and then we're going to go into some questions. So we've got a philosophy and then a tool, which is the process, but I'll only have time for one of those. So I'll start with the philosophy, and it's called 5 Perspectives. It is a tool, so the 5 Perspectives tool. And this idea, and you'll see, ladies, it will, I think, resonate. The idea is that there's 2 unhealthy perspectives and 3 healthy ones. And the 2 unhealthy ones are, the first is, I'm right, you're wrong. So in that perspective of, as we said at the beginning, that's where all that sort of what we shouldn't do lies, where we believe that we're right and it makes the other person unequal. And as soon as you've got inequality, you can never get to the other side where there is grace. So we need to always be equal. Similarly, so the I'm right perspective is, I always do the washing up, you must do this, you never do that, that's all I'm right, you're wrong. The next one is, I'm wrong, you're right. And that's where we go into the I'm a terrible person, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. Because that is also unequal and can never, and we may think, oh, I'm taking responsibility for everything. No, that also leads to this lack of ability to get to a mutually respectful outcome on the other side. So the 3 healthy perspectives are, I observe. What are the facts? What has actually happened? And this is, to all of you saying, about getting out of the emotion, stepping away from the heat of it. It's like, actually, what actually happened? What are the facts? Can we say it in language that is evaluative and not subjective? So like clean, objective language. The second is, I feel, and that is about owning your feelings. In our tool, we actually start with ask as well, so that comes later. But actually owning your feelings. This is what I feel. They're mine. I'm not going to put them on you as fact. And also owning them out of respect for yourself and what do you feel and what do you value and what's your experience, and that is all valid, but it is only valid if you also have the final one, which is I'm curious. So that is what is going on for the other person. And I think for us, and I think the idea that I think we all share, who said it? It's from conflict resolution, nonviolent communication, that's it. It's the idea that you can be an advocate of your own and the other person's needs and values. And that is this underlying kind of powerful concept, which means that actually we can get to the grace because we are an advocate of our own needs and of the other person's. So that's our 5 perspective tool that we then lead to COAST, which is the process that you go through. But I think there's a lot, we're kind of saying really similar things, which is not, unsurprising given that we've, already chatted and realized that we're very, very synergistic, which is wonderful. So that said, we're now going to get on to some wonderful questions that have come up. So the first question is from Olga Shochneva. I hope I've said it right. So what should you do when someone won't engage and deal with conflict, even if you insist, especially if they are in a more senior role than you are? Does anyone want to start that, to respond to that? Great, lovely. Off you go, Leslie.
I have something. I think the first thing is a lot of times when someone's frustrated with that, they've kept on doing the same thing, like whatever it is, asked for a meeting or tried to stop them, like when they were on their way to somewhere else. We have to change the channel of how we're communicating. Just because if one way doesn't work, try something else. And it's the old thing of like, if you're texting with someone and you get to 3 rounds and there's something that feels like you're butting heads, well, get off the text. If a formal meeting doesn't work, hey, do a side-by-side. Ask the person, hey, can I walk with you on the way to your next appointment? And just find different ways. But if you keep on doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. So try something different and just try to be creative. Ask someone else who has a good relationship with that person. Hey, how do you have those great conversations you told me about? Maybe it's a certain time of day. Maybe it's that, it's in a different location, or like I said, side by side. Those walks to get the coffee or on the way to a meeting work so well because now you're not facing each other and it changes the dynamics.
Brilliant. Yeah. So don't come at the same thing. Einstein's theory of madness. Don't do the same thing and expect a different result. Come at it. Be creative. Find a different angle. Love it. Okay. Let's go to the next question. So, how do you handle the situation when you're dealing with when you're dealing with conflict and the person is attacking your identity? So, Karleen, would you like to answer this one?
Sure. Can you pop that up one more time? That's a really simple response for me. But I just want to make sure I understand it before I just shoot off. How do you handle the situation of when you're dealing with conflict? The person is attacking your identity. Really simple, I would say, is that the problem in this situation? Something along that line, because I talked about truth and just calling it out. And I don't have a problem. I mean, a lot of people look at me and when I'm dealing, because if you listen to my tone, if you listen, when I am in private situations or more casual settings, people look at me and go, holy crud, wow, she's a lot. Because I have an opinion generally, because of the way I sit, the way I present, I come across as something like that. So a lot of people will say, you intimidate, or especially when they're in a conflict, I'll say, is that the problem? Or if I can lead that, another response I would have is, so when I've gone into, say, mediation, I'll say, I know this is a nerve-wracking situation. So I'm going to go ahead and go first. And that way it'll give you time. When somebody is attacking me, I would simply come at it face front and say, does that have relevance? Not, does that have relevance, but more of, is that important to the conversation, or is that causing a stall?
Brilliant. So I love it. So you're naming it, but you're also very mindful of the energy with which you name it. Is that
And I'm
correct?
also very self-aware, because
Yeah.
are we willing to be self-aware? Because maybe that is a factor if they're coming at you. Maybe that is a factor. Maybe something I am doing is a factor. Curiosity, attitude. I'm playing all of those cards right in that comment.
Brilliant. So I love that, because it's like, actually, you're attacking my identity. Is there something that I can do about this that I think is justified, that I can examine and look at from a grounded place, or from a stepping up to the balcony place, as we would say, Leslie, and then actually being able to hold that space for them and say, okay, let's call the elephant out that's in this room. Is this it? But not getting emotion into it. That's lovely, really helpful. Thank you. And then let's go for another question. We've got some lovely questions coming through. From Deborah Hoffman. I tend to freeze when conflicts unexpectedly arise. I'm sure that happens to many, Deborah. So do you have any tools for that? So yeah, let's go for you on this one, Lindy. It would be lovely to get your thoughts.
I saw that one and I loved it already. I gave a few ideas and shout on it too, but this is true for so many of us. And so a few thoughts. One is just trying to reframe what you see conflict as. Remember, conflict is just different views. And so how do you not make it this big, very high bar, high stakes, scary thing, but to build the muscle through those lower stake areas as much as you can? One of the ones that ways to work on it, I think, is actually really helpful, because as a professor, right, you certainly have conflict in the classroom, students with very strong views. And for me, doing improv classes, not the fancy skits, mind you, but just very beginner. If someone throws a ball at you, you have to say a word and you can't self-censor. The only rule basically is don't freeze. Anything you say will keep it moving forward. I found that one of the most powerful things that I've personally done, to really get out of my head a little bit in those situations that are a little bit scarier, to realize that whatever I have to say is usually better than what I think it might be, to help me stay in the game in real life. The other one is, the more that you're not caught off guard, right? I think all of us are more likely to hit fight or flight when we're caught off guard. And so if you do have a more difficult conversation coming up, to make sure that it's scheduled and not accidental as much as you can, because I don't know about you all, but researchers say this too, that if we avoid a conflict for a long time, like Leslie mentioned, it will blow up. And whether it's you or your team. And so making sure, if there is something like that coming, that you have a plan for it, you put a date to it. And especially you're trying to do that thought exercise in advance over, what are the things I want to accomplish in this conversation? What does the other side want to accomplish? And what strategies, phrases, ideas might I have to help us see eye to eye? And so especially if you have the tendency to hit fight or flight mode in conflicts, try to plan for them as much as you can, prepare for them. And then do some improv, so once you're in the moment, you can stay flowing.
Love that. I think that's so useful. And just running through what you said again. So it's kind of, firstly, we can reframe conflict, so we can try and retrain ourselves so it's not something we need to be so scared of. Secondly, do the scan. Are there conflicts coming up? And then plan for it. And thirdly, actually, we can practice that muscle so we don't need to freeze in the moment. And I think these are brilliant. I would just add, we have something called the empathy hat. And it's about building again that muscle of going, what's going on for the other person? What are the values that are underlying, their frustration or their anger or their upset? If you can train yourself to do that, almost in the moment, be like, I'm going to metaphorically put on my empathy hat. And then you can listen to them in a different way. So rather than listen to them being like, oh my God, rabbit in headlights, I am seriously getting attacked right now. We listen with the empathy hat and we just hold, we go, oh, okay, they're really upset. What can I get to the nugget of what's really driving that upset, that frustration? And then doing the same for yourself, because it's got to be both ways. And so I think that can be a really helpful tool of like understanding what's going on for them, understanding what's going on for yourself, and then seeing that as a communication from that space. Okay, I think we have time for one more. So let's bring it up. Oh, there is no, oh, here we go. Kimono right. So how do you deal with the conflict when the person avoids you and seizes communication? That is such a good question, and that goes to the pushing it under the rug. Maybe we can all do like a one-line, useful, quick, speed-fire response on this, because I'm sure everybody's got something to say about this. So Leslie, if we start with you.
Find a way to avoid the attacks, because chances are they're avoiding you because they felt attacked. So that's really where it gets complicated, but absolutely avoid the attacks so that they don't feel like they have to constantly defend.
Amazing. So I guess figure out why they're avoiding you. Make sure that it's not because you're attacking them, but if you are, don't attack. Brilliant. Karleen, over to you.
Can you pop that question up again?
Okay, Karleen's frozen. We'll come back to Karleen. So Lindy, over to you. So this is what to do if someone's refusing to be in conflict with you, avoiding conflict with you. Start with Lindy. Oh, Karleen, you're back? Okay, so Karleen, you're back. So just, one line on what you'd advise.
If someone is trying to avoid conflict with me, you back up a little bit. I did have that situation where somebody just got up and left the room. And it was with an attorney that I was dealing with. And he was really adamant about something that was happening in his firm. And so I was listening, and then he just got up and left. And I was like, so I went back, and sometimes your body language. So I moved my shoulders down, and I went to him and I said, are we finished with that conversation? Or should we continue? And then he just opened up, and everything just broke open, and he just needed somebody to approach it differently for him.
Love it. So approach it differently, come in, be unthreatening, really, which is similar to Leslie. So Lindy, sort of one line from you on how you'd approach it.
Ask for the conversation one-on-one, show up in a way that's geared towards curiosity. Or if you're in a team meeting with this person, set up a way for them to brainstorm or share ideas asynchronously so that you're able to understand their perspective or what's going on. You know, I used to love Jamboard before it went away. Now you have Miro or Google PowerPoint where people can share ideas. Maybe it's an after-action review from a project that you send around in advance, people could put ideas into, but lower the bar for them to engage in conflict with you. You know, maybe it's through that one-on-one if you're lucky, or if not, in other ways in which you're interacting and presuming this is at work, you're finding other ways to get their opinion.
I think that's super useful. And I would say, just to add to what you've all said, which is just so right. Like, it's the same thing about Einstein. Come find a different approach, but also, like Karleen, your earlier tip was about coming in with making the ground fertile, like be kind. So this is not a dangerous conflict. This is one that is going to be mutually beneficial for both of us, where we get to a positive outcome. And it's actually the reframe as well. Brilliant. Okay, so this final minute, I would like to invite everybody who's here and been here for the last hour to just pop in the messaging one of your biggest takeaways or key learnings from the last 59 minutes together. So please, will you put that down now? We'd love to see it. We'll all have a little read while the minute passes. And meanwhile, while that's coming through, I just want to say, Leslie, Karleen, Lindy, you have been such brilliant guests. Thank you so much. There is just an absolute wealth of insight and knowledge and tools. And it just makes me so happy, because I think we didn't know that we all were going to be along the same, saying the same kind of thing. And actually, this work is so important, bringing sort of peace and a pathway for peaceful, non-scary, the difficult stuff alchemized into something more kind and humanity focused. So thank you so much to all of you doing such great work in the world. And it's been such a pleasure hosting. And meanwhile, we've got these lovely comments coming through. Thank you, everybody. I'll just read a few out. So we've got kindness, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Yes. Do not ask why. Yes, very good. Focus on a positive one-liner throughout. Asking follow-up questions. Yes, that one was for me as well. I love that. Seek to understand again. Lara, brilliant. Be curious. Curiosity, respect, power of pause. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been an absolute delight hosting today. Thank you to you all. Bless.